Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at the data control language subset of SQL, aka DCL. It's probably the least used in an introductory class. We want to still talk about some of the basic concepts for it. So DCL is about who gets what level of access. So this is the question we're trying to answer. So these effects on this can be both positive and negative that we're working with. And generally this is a management or upper level decision we're talking about. And the themes we want to talk about as we're working about DCL are the structure of the databases, the security of the databases, and the actual access we're giving to the database itself. So DCL is talking about what kind of data control we're going to grant for this, what kind of access level. And so we have either roles or users. Roles are the ones we would definitely want to work with. This is the group level of permission. Like this is the role you have. You're a user, you're a developer, you're a manager, you're an analyst. Those different types of terms that describe you as you work with the databases, the kind of role you'll be assigned to with that. This is very useful when we're talking about especially the real world type, when you're actually doing more than simply just a tiny assignment. This is where you're actually doing like project level stuff. We're actually doing real world activities with the database. A role itself by default has multiple memberships. You can have, I can be a member of this role over here, I can be a member of this role over here. And so I can have different memberships in different roles inside that. Whichever role has the least amount of access is the one that I'll actually get access to. So we'll talk about that more as we do some more information. And this is the best practice for doing permissions. You should be assigning the permissions based on the role that user has, not by the actual user itself. So just keep that in mind. The user is the actual individual person who's logging onto the database. And this is an individual level. It's password based. So you log in with your username and password. That's how you get into the actual database. And this can be resolved via an IP address. This can be resolved via a host or even just a local connection to the machine itself. And so this is something you'd actually be doing on your actual thing, especially when you're talking about this. I'm working with an Oracle system right here, so I can't actually even run any of these demos myself. But when you're working with, say, for example, a MariaDB or a MySQL system that you've created and installed on your local machine, you can definitely see how this will work on your own as you actually go through and do this. So the first thing we have is the create role. This is where you want to define the roles first and users afterward. Again, we're talking about the idea of a top-down design principle on this because I want to talk about the bigger picture itself and then work my way down as we get closer. So talk about the actual roles themselves first and then go from there. Now, when you actually create the role itself, there's no permission granted. Just because you say this is an admin level role or it's a whatever level role, that doesn't actually grant anything to it. It's simply saying it's a group name. And so that's just the idea that it has, this is what this user's group name is called. Oracle specifically has a common user prefix requirement. This is a variable you can set on your actual Oracle instance, and it says on that the default net is C ### or C ## or C ##, however you want to say it. But that's what's going to be the start of every user's name and every user role you'll be working with. You have C ##, and then whatever goes on after that. If you're looking at my database class here from Weber, you can also see that for everyone's username right there. It's like, it starts with that name, and that's because it's the default username practice using the Oracle server system. So we can see the actual create role syntax. So I have my create role administrati, and that will actually give an error message if you're trying to run it saying it's like, because you're not following the common user prefix, it won't generate that actual thing. And so that one's going to fail. It's not going to actually execute. However, my create role C ## administrati, that one will work just fine because it matches the common user prefix. And if I had permission on my database, I could actually do that. Create role C ## CS students, again using this underscore of snake case. Again, using the snake case naming convention right there, so I can say I can actually see what's going on in that, and so that's going to say, I can read that easily, and that's how I'm working with that. That matches the common user prefix, and then but also if I had create user access granted to me as a user, that's how you'll be able to work for that. And so I create the roles first, and that's the first thing you're going to do. Then you would create your users themselves. And then we're doing just the basics on this. We're not doing a detail on here. And so a user also has a common user prefix requirement. So again, it's that C ## that goes along with that. Again, you need to specify the password for that user. And you can make it so that they have to automatically make a brand new password immediately. That can actually be defined inside the actual create user statement. And there's still no permissions that you've granted at this point. This is just creating the role itself and the user itself. And so the create user, and then C ## username, identified by in the password text. Note that I have the little note here. This is clear text. This is actually just specifying the clear text value for that. And then password expire, by adding that command to it, it's saying, as soon as they log in, they have to change their password because, again, you want to use that clear text password as the actual password for that. So you can make that go from there. And then C ## database student, same thing, 12345, and password expired. They can't use the 12345 password. And so that's just the basic structure of making a very simple user. There are more complex ways to deal with user in that, but again, this is just the idea of an introduction to how you could create a user inside a database system. Now the privileges are what we're talking about when we see what we want to actually be able to do. And so we have management level privileges, and we have developer level privileges, and we have worker privileges as well. On the management quote on that, we have the idea of the DDL subset. So regular developers are probably not going to be actually creating actual data structures inside the database. They won't be creating tables. They probably won't be dropping tables. And especially we're talking long-term benefit here, we're not going to be altering tables either, because at the developer level, we're using that structure that's been existed and designed by the database management team. And they'll be sharing that information with the developers and going from there. So this is generally a management level structure on that, who will be having access to the DDL statements on there. Developer level access would be like access to the CRUD, so insert, select, update, delete. Those are the commands you're going to be using all the time, as well as probably the execute functions. You can actually call functions on that database because there's stuff that's actually applying to data on that. And those are things you'd be looking at. So those are the privilege levels that I'm expecting to most likely see. But CRUD are probably the basic ones that you'd be using as a developer, and possibly the execute as well. So those are the privileges we'd be looking for. And so we use the grant command to actually add those permissions or privileges to a user or to a role. And again, it's grouped by this language subset. You can separate multiple permissions by that comma, and you can apply to only one object at a time. So that's one table at a time. So this is not something you're just going to randomly do. So you're going to have to actually specify, oh, here's the table I'm giving access to. And it's because each table is its own thing. You have to make sure you specify the tables you need and go through that one at a time and catch all those values. So every table inside the DBMS needs the approval appropriate grant attached to it. The privileges on the role level is the best practice. I know I said that earlier again, but again, come back to that. You don't want to grant privileges to users, you grant privileges to the role itself, and you then add the user to that role. That's the way you want to actually have this set up when you're working with a database. And then you then grant that role to the user, because that user now is a member of that role and they can actually do the things that are on that. Now, if you grant multiple roles to a user, then the role that has the least amount of privilege is the role that that user then has access to. So keep that in mind. If you're granting multiple roles out, make sure you keep that in mind when you're trying to do, say, for example, oh, I want to make sure I revoke the lower level user if you want to actually give them a higher level access to something. So that's just something to keep in mind. Our grant syntax is pretty simple. So a permission to a role, you're going to grant select on some table name to the role you're looking with. More realistic one would be grant insert, update, delete on, and then that table name to that group on that role on there. If I'm granting a role to a user, I grant C#, CSS students to the C#, database student, or grant C#, administrati to the database student. And that's how I'd actually grant those roles to that student. And so we'd have that happen. Again, revoking, anything that be granted can be revoked as well. And again, if there's a conflict between permission levels, the lower permission level is what is applied. And again, you want to plan before using this. You don't want to just randomly throw things out willy-nilly. And so revoking syntax, I'm going to revoke insert on all grades from C# hashtag CS students. So no CS students can insert onto that table. Or I'm going to revoke a role from a user. I'm going to revoke the administrati role from the database students. And so you can revoke from either the field, or you can revoke a role. So you have different ways to use it, but the same basic structure applies for that. When do we do this? So again, the DCL subset is not something you're going to be working with as a developer most of the time. It's generally for the management and security level users of the database. This is the people who are working above you and working on doing the overarching big goal of that. And it's because of the importance of the data integrity, the importance of the privacy of the user's information, the security of everyone involved with that, as well as the overall structure you're looking at. These are big picture concerns that on a simple database development project, you're probably not going to be concerned with, so though you're not going to have access to that at all. If you get an error when you're trying to do something that you think is because of a DCL access, make sure you read the error itself, and then you can identify that to your appropriate management or teacher level of person, so you can figure out how that your role membership might need to be modified so you can do the appropriate things for your job. But that's where you actually have to look and see what happens and see what you're working with before you move on. I hope this is a great introduction to the DCL subset and how you can actually use it inside a database. Cheers and see you next time. Have a good day.